Before we get into our stories today, I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Phil and I'm from England in the United Kingdom. I've been creating content on YouTube for around 3 years now, primarily in the gaming genre, but today I'm launching an entirely new series, and this is the debut episode. I intend to bring you the most terrifying paranormal stories from all around the world, whether it be ghostly sightings, out of this world encounters, or just eerie tales in general. Welcome to A Haunting Tale. If you enjoy today's content, be sure to stay with me on this journey. Thank you for listening to that short introduction. Now let's move on to today's stories. With this being the first ever episode of A Haunting Tale, I'll be telling a couple of stories from my home city of Liverpool, England. These descriptions are first-hand encounters from ordinary people who experienced extraordinary things. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, after listening to these stories, your opinion may somewhat differentiate from what it was previously. So try to stay open-minded and please enjoy the video. Our first tale today, the Bold Street Time Slip. Bold Street lies in the heart of the centre of the city of Liverpool, a very busy area bustling with activity. It is home to several stores and businesses. Over the years, many have claimed to have experienced what came to be known as time slips, where as they were simply walking through the streets, it would be apparent that they somehow stepped into an entirely different time zone. One such claimant was a local off-duty police officer known only as Frank, who hailed from the area of Melling, which is a neighbouring borough on the outskirts of Liverpool itself. The incident occurred during the daytime on a Saturday in July of 1996, where Frank and his wife Carol were out on a shopping trip. While at Central Station, Frank and his wife separated for a short while. Carol attended Dylan's bookshop on Bold Street itself, while Frank headed to a record store on Ranley Street, close by. It would be around 20 minutes later that Frank would return to rejoin his wife. He walked up an incline leading onto Bold Street and suddenly noticed a deadly silence among the very busy area. Frank thought this very odd, as only a short time earlier the street was packed with shoppers as was usual for a Saturday afternoon. Taking a moment to collect his surroundings, he was suddenly startled by a passing van, honking its horn in order to move Frank out of its way. But the peculiar thing was that the van was a small and old-fashioned box van which looked to be completely outdated. Across the side of the van was the logo for a company named Kaplan's. Frank continued across the street, intending to rejoin his wife, Carol, at Dylan's bookshop, but to his utter surprise, Dylan's was not there. Stood in its place was a store named Cripps, and its windows displayed women's accessories such as handbags and shoes. Thinking he may have taken a wrong turn, Frank turned around to get his bearings, only to be greeted by a busy street once more. But the citizens of Bold Street were now clothed in attires that would be fitting some generations ago, maybe from the 1940s or 50s. The men wore trilbies and overcoats, while the women were dressed in scarves, berets, and or cartwheel hats. Most also wore gloves. The vehicles upon the road also looked very old-fashioned. Frank was utterly puzzled by the entire experience, but was soon brought back to reality when a young lady, maybe in her 20s, strolled past Frank, dressed in the more recent attire consisting of a lime-coloured sleeveless top, also carrying a shopping bag from the popular Miss Selfridge's. The young girl was about to enter the Cripps store, but a terrified Frank grabbed her by the arm, immediately asking if she had experienced the same phenomena as he did. The girl smiled and simply replied with the following: "Yes, I thought it was a new shop that had just opened. I was going in to look at the clothes, now it's a bookshop." A confused Frank followed the girl into the store. In what occurred seemingly in the blink of an eye, The store had now reverted back to its original state. Frank now stood in Dylan's bookshop, where his wife was purchasing. He of course told Carol of the experience, who stated that she hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Frank was utterly convinced that this hadn't been a hallucination. Sometime later, the police officer would appear on the popular Billy Butler radio show and tell his story of events. Within minutes, listeners would call up the show to state that in the 1950s and 60s there was actually a store called Cripps, which was later replaced by Dylan's, and there was also a company around that time called Kaplan's, just as seen on the passing van. If you study the topic of the time-slip stories of Bold Street, you can find reports of several similar accounts, experienced by regular people, just like Frank. The Haunting of Knotty Ash. In July of 1975, a lady named Ross Crawford had become married and with her husband moved into their first home, a 3-bedroom terraced house located in Max Road, Knotty Ash, Liverpool. Upon entering this property through the front door, you will be greeted immediately by a set of stairs which led to the bedrooms. There was another door to the left at the bottom of the staircase, which would take you into the living area, connecting both a kitchen and a bathroom as you proceed further through. Shortly after moving into a new home, Ross, while performing chores around the house, would exit from the living area, laundry in hand, ready to take the clothing upstairs to the bedrooms. Suddenly, she would be stopped in her tracks. Sat about halfway up the stairs was a very young girl. Ross would describe her as being maybe around 4 or 5 years of age with long dark hair. Her first instinct was that one of the neighbouring children, who was maybe a little confused, had simply wandered into the wrong home. Trying of course not to startle the child, Ross would calmly greet her with a simple hello. She would tell of how the little girl, after Ross had greeted her, just turned and walked away. Following her up, the tenant would become immediately confused, as the little girl had seemingly completely vanished. This would be the only ever time that Ross would visibly encounter the young child, but it wouldn't be her only experience. She would claim that quite often she could hear the child through the walls, walking up and down the staircase, all the while whistling, the common way that a child would, sucking through her lips as opposed to blowing out. Ross often felt the little girl's presence, particularly when she was either in the kitchen area of the home or the living room. Many times, the volume on the home's radio system would go up and down, like the young girl was playing around. Over time, Ross would become good friends with one of her neighbours. This neighbour had several children of her own, and one in particular, the youngest, a girl named Sarah, would visit the home of Ross and her husband with her mother. After a few visits, little Sarah would ask her mother's friend what the name of her sister was. Ross would tell the girl that she didn't have a sister, only for young Sarah to reply with the following: "You do. She sits on the stairs and plays with me, but won't tell me her name." Ross would ask Sarah if she saw the little girl often in the home, to which she replied that she did. 2 years would pass and the married couple would move out of their home in Knotty Ash. Not in fear, simply because Ross and her husband were both employed full-time and could now afford a bigger home. 6 months later, while at her place of work, a young man would visit Ross. She didn't recognise him at first, but would soon introduce himself. He and his wife were the ones who had purchased a home from Ross in Max Road. Ross questioned on why he had visited her, and, in her wording, he looked disturbed and a little shaken. The man would go on to ask Ross if she could shed any light on the young ghost in their new home. He would claim that his wife had experienced the spirit many times, not only on the same staircase where Ross had first encountered her, but also in the kitchen area too. He wanted to know if they were in any form of danger, to which Ross replied that she had personally never felt afraid of the young girl, and it certainly wasn't the reason herself and her husband had moved away from their home. To this day, the identity of the young girl still remains a mystery.